Chapter 61, Spell Refinement Function. Why not just rob Gringotts? The simplest point is that even after Dumbledore's death, he hadn't realized the locket was a fake. That alone proved Dumbledore didn't know everything. He wasn't a god, and he had his blind spots. More importantly, Dumbledore had a fatal weakness, his sister. It was precisely because of that weakness that Voldemort tricked him into wearing the ring with the Resurrection Stone and let the curse take hold of him. Then again, if Dumbledore had discovered the locket was a fake before he died, he might have felt even more relieved. That meant he hadn't been entirely alone on the path to destroying Horcruxes. Of course, until I'm on the level of Dumbledore or Voldemort, or even Grindelwald, it's better to stay low-key. Dylan Hawkwood still thought of himself as a first-year wizard. Being low-key was less a posture of fear than a matter of caution. After mastering the counterspell to Fiendfire, he opened his system panel. He had used most of the other functions already, but there was one he hadn't tried, the spell refinement feature under the wand icon. At first, he had nothing worth refining, and after he'd acquired 3 max-level Unforgivable Curses, he felt even less need for refinement. But now, with a growing repertoire of spells, many of them could benefit from it. The reason he hadn't used it before was simple. It's ridiculously expensive. System panel. Name Dylan Hawkwood. Refinable spells. Levitation Charm, Transfiguration, Fiendfire Curse, Scourgify, Incendio, Lumos, Crucio, Imperio, Parasitic Possession, Avada Kedavra, Ric December Refinement Cost, 10,000 galleons per use. Remarks: when a spell reaches level 7, the refinement function unlocks automatically. Levels 8, 9, and 10 each grant 1 additional refinement opportunity. Seeing the cost again made Dylan groan inwardly. 10,000 galleons for a single refinement. Who could afford that? It was far more than the price of a wand or robes. A spell needed up to 4 refinements to reach max level. That was 40,000 galleons per spell. 10 spells? 400,000. 100 spells? 4 million. This wasn't just spell work, it was practically robbing Gringotts. The numbers were terrifying. A cheap wand went for about 7 galleons. 4 million galleons could buy roughly 570,000 wands. If he used a different wand every day without repeating, he could last more than 1,500 years. At 3 broomsticks, a butterbeer cost only 2 galleons. 4 million galleons would buy 2 million butterbeers. Even if he drank himself into a giant, he couldn't finish that. Luckily, Dylan didn't have 100 spells to refine. Only the ones listed on the panel qualified. At 10,000 galleons per refinement, he could still afford to do a few. He'd saved a decent amount in pounds from his parents over the half-school year and converted most of it into galleons at Gringotts. The goblins there seemed to look down on Muggleborns and on human currency, so they hadn't set strict exchange limits between pounds or rubles and other human currencies and galleons. Dylan had noticed this loophole and taken advantage of it, but he'd been careful. He didn't want the goblins to notice a single huge deposit and patch the gap, so he exchanged his money little by little, small amounts many times. He didn't convert everything into galleons either. He took some sickles and a few nuts, which gave him even more flexibility and fewer restrictions when converting. Every time the goblins saw him, they exchanged only a modest sum and treated him like a poor boy. That arrogance was Dylan's advantage. While they underestimated him, he quietly built up a substantial stash. He didn't mind their condescension. He preferred it to suspicion. For now, though, most of his spells were only at levels 3 to 5. Even with several max-level spells as a foundation, he'd learned many different spells, and he didn't want to pour his resources into refining only a select few. His philosophy was simple. At this stage, he wanted to learn as many spells as possible, rather than perfect a handful. Having several max-level spells gave him a higher starting point for learning new ones, 2, 3, or even 4 levels instead of starting from 0, so he preferred breadth. Greed for spells was his motto, steady progress was his other. "I have 12 spells eligible for initial refinement," he muttered. 6 of the dark spells can be refined 4 times each. Ric Decembra's the same. Lumos, Incendio, and Scourgify are at level 8 and can be refined twice. Levitation Charm and Transfiguration are at level 7 and can only be refined once. Choosing which spell to refine for the first time took thought. Since it's my first refinement, I should pick the most useful spell. Which spell was most useful? The answer was blunt and obvious. Avada Kedavra. Dylan scrolled to his funds on the panel. Money, 94,508 galleons, 8,600 sickles, 10,000 newts, 100,000 pounds. 10,000 galleons for one refinement, he said to himself. I wonder if I can pay with sickles, or even pounds. Chapter 62, Too Much Refinement Task. Pounds can be exchanged for gold, and gold plays a crucial role throughout the magical world, brewing potions, alchemy, even learning spells. Dylan wasn't surprised that pounds could be converted into galleons. If the achievement system could accept pounds or gold directly for spell refinement, instead of forcing him to buy refinement attempts with galleons, it would be far more convenient. After a moment's thought, he decided which spell to refine. Rather than converting galleons, he tried using pounds. Message. Do you wish to spend 100,000 pounds to refine the spell Avada Kedavra? Dylan's eyes brightened at first. Pounds could substitute for galleons. Then he saw the number and his vision went black. How much? How much did you say? He rubbed his eyes and stared at the horrid string of zeros again. 100,000 Gringotts. This is ridiculous. He scowled. 100,000 pounds. That'd be 20,000 galleons at Gringotts. You want 10,000 galleons to refine a spell, and you charge me 100,000 pounds for it? He forced a laugh. Was this an achievement system or a pay-to-win scam? In the end, it still seemed cheapest to pay with galleons. Sighing, Dylan spent 10,000 galleons. Message. You have spent 10,000 galleons. You have opened the Avada Kedavra refinement panel. Please check the refinement task. The prompt made his stomach drop. So I paid, and the money's gone, but it won't tell me what the refinement does. It gives me a task instead? He tapped his wand and read the panel. Avada be refined. Avada Kedavra. Trait to be unlocked. Refinement task activated. Please cast Avada Kedavra 44 times on the same living target. You will unlock this spell's trait and complete the spell refinement. Dylan's eyes narrowed. It took my money so fast. Why didn't it tell me I'd have to complete a task to unlock the trait? He ground his teeth. 44 consecutive Avadas on a single living target. Where was he supposed to do that? The money was gone, though, so he was stuck. He started thinking through options. It doesn't specify what living target, he muttered. A toad should count, right? He could go into the Forbidden Forest and find an acromantula, or catch a toad, mouse, or even a mosquito or fly. Better yet, transfigure an object into a living creature and use Avada on it. Any of those would work, if he could do it without being seen. After already wasting 10,000 galleons to refine a dark arts spell, he didn't want to risk refining other dark arts mutterings without knowing what kinds of outrageous tasks awaited. Who knew what the Fiendfire refinement would demand? Cast Fiendfire on Old Deng 10 times. The thought made him grimace. He decided instead to spend another 10,000 galleons to refine Transfiguration. Message. Do you wish to spend 10,000 galleons to refine the spell Transfiguration? The system informed him that Transfiguration had a broad scope and wasn't a single simple spell. Dylan had only reached level 7 Transfiguration so far, though with Professor McGonagall's help, he was steadily working toward level 8. Even McGonagall herself wouldn't claim to have fully mastered the highest levels. There was more for him to learn. Message. You have spent 10,000 galleons. You have opened the Transfiguration refinement panel. Please check the refinement task. He'd spent another 10,000, and his remaining stash was down to 74,000 galleons. It stung to see the number fall so quickly. He couldn't afford to refine that many spells. The thought nudged him toward practical concerns. I should be earning money, he admitted, but when? There's so much to do. Study spells, practice combat in the Forbidden Forest, gather materials for potion research. He thought of his parents. I'll let my 2 shameless parents worry about earning. They're like an old married couple who still want their own world. Instead of grinding to be the first wealthy generation, he could be second generation, free to spend. He planned to write them a letter urging them to find steady work or invest, but he doubted their business sense. If they invested blindly, they'd lose everything. He'd have to give them clear directions and safe options. I'll figure that out tonight and mail the letter tomorrow, he decided, shelving the worry for later. He focused back on the system. Spell to be refined, transfiguration, spell trait to be unlocked, instantaneous transformation without stagnation, refinement task activated. Please use transfiguration on Professor McGonagall once. You will unlock this spell's trait and complete the spell refinement. Dylan stared at the task and felt his mouth twitch. What the? He stared for a moment, incredulous. The system wanted him to cast transfiguration on Minerva McGonagall, a true master of the subject and a Hogwarts professor. Why not just tell him to go attack Dumbledore directly? Outrage and absurdity collided in his head. This refinement system wasn't just picky, it was impossible to do openly. He had no idea how he was supposed to use transfiguration on McGonagall without getting into monumental trouble. Chapter 63. The holiday is coming to an end. It's all right. These two tasks sound outrageous at first glance, but in reality, Dylan paused. They were still pretty outrageous, but not entirely impossible. The first refinement task was simply to use the killing curse 44 times on the same target. Straightforward, if grim. The second, transfiguration refinement, only required him to perform transfiguration once on Professor McGonagall. Next time I talk to Professor McGonagall about transfiguration, I can suggest a practical exercise where we transfigure each other. That way it won't seem so sudden if I transfigure her, he thought. He sighed. Both tasks were tricky, and not that tricky. It depended entirely on how he handled them. The refinement property for the killing curse, Luoyi Fention, just from the name, it's hard to tell what it actually does, he mused. But the transfiguration refinement, instantaneous transformation, sounds easier to grasp. It should let me cast transfiguration instantly and make the transformation process smoother, right? For the amount of galleons required, the transfiguration characteristic was worth it. Typically, to strengthen a spell or add effects, a wizard would have to research and experiment for themselves. Now he only needed to spend a modest sum and complete some benign tasks to give a spell new properties, an opportunity countless wizards would have killed for and still failed to obtain. Dylan thought it over, then let it go. With these two refinements as a foundation, he didn't want to rush into refining more spells. It wasn't that he was stingy, the fees and tasks were not the issue, but his galleons had other uses. There were expensive, essential potion ingredients and other materials to buy. He couldn't pour his 90,000 plus galleons into refinements just to add a single characteristic to a spell. He had worked hard to save that money. He'd even persuaded his parents to quit their jobs so they could focus on earning more for him. To make sure they didn't slack off, he wrote to them constantly, supervising their efforts and offering suggestions. When they hit problems they couldn't solve, and they wrote to him for advice. A large portion of the money they made ended up in his pocket, so he felt obligated to help them through their difficulties. "Sigh, I'm really struggling," Dylan muttered. At that moment, the dormitory door opened and Ron came in. After greeting him, Dylan stopped worrying about the refinement tasks and took out a sheet of letter paper to plan how his parents might double their current capital. By the time he finished the letter, it was very late. Harry had returned to the dormitory and was chatting with Ron. Dylan planned to have Luna mail the letter in the morning. He brushed his teeth, cast Scourgify on himself, hugged Coalball, and fell into a deep sleep. This time, he didn't transfigure his wizard robe into pajamas. Each beautification cost 100 galleons. 10 transformations would cost 1,000. By transforming into pajamas a few times less, he could afford another refinement task. No matter how absurd the task, it could let an advanced spell he'd mastered gain new magical characteristics. The next day, after mailing the letter, Dylan resumed following Professor Flitwick, continuing to learn counterdark art spells. Time slipped by. The Christmas holiday neared its end. Seamus and Neville had already returned to school. Hermione came back on the last day of the holiday. Dylan sat at the long table in the Great Hall, gnawing on a Forbidden Forest dark flame durian, almost as big as his head. It wasn't from the house elves. The fruit had been given to him by Hagrid 2 days earlier and had only fully ripened today. He'd brought it to the hall to eat. Contrary to legend, the durian had no offensive smell. It was very sweet. The flesh was a deep purplish black, veined with dark flame patterns that flowed like slow magma beneath a translucent, glowing membrane. Because the fruit was so difficult to ripen, Hagrid had only given him one piece. Dylan was just indulging his curiosity. When Hermione walked over, she greeted him enthusiastically. "Oh, what are you eating? It looks a bit scary." "A durian. Hagrid gave it to me." He smiled when Hermione blinked and, unbothered, sat down beside him. "Your Christmas gift was very creative. The magical color-changing scarf. After I got back to school, I found it can change color with the seasons and the room temperature in Hogwarts Castle. Oh my, did you knit it yourself? I love it so much." "I knitted it with magic. I'm glad you like it. I was worried you'd think a scarf was boring." "Not at all." Harry and Ron exchanged glances and shot Dylan a look that held a flicker of resentment. "Hey, Dylan, how come you only gave Hermione that scarf? I wanted one too, but you only gave me a quill." Ron scowled. "And some candy." Dylan tilted his head. "You haven't used that quill yet, have you?" Ron froze. "What do you mean? Does the quill do something else?" Dylan pursed his lips. "It's a smart quill, or rather, it started as a blank magical quill. I loaded a program into it so it can automatically correct your spelling and grammar. Hopefully you'll write potion recipes a bit more clearly." Ron's eyes widened and surprise lit his face. "Oh, it can do that? I misunderstood you." Dylan gave him a flat look. "It's fine. I'm used to it." Ron scratched his head awkwardly. Dylan glanced at Harry, who looked like he wanted to say something but held back. "As for your necklace, I put an invisible charm inside it. If you run into danger, it'll protect you once." Harry scratched his head too. Hermione, at that moment, set her backpack on her lap and spoke in a low, excited voice. "Do you know? Chapter 64. This is how unofficial history came about." "Know what?" Harry and Ron both leaned in. Dylan, meanwhile, was still gnawing on the durian. Hermione opened her satchel and pulled out a book. "This is another gift Dylan gave me." "What? Why did Dylan give you two gifts?" Ron's eyes widened. Hermione waved a hand. "That's not the point. The point is, guess what I found in this book?" Dylan glanced at the title in her hand. "Alchemy? Have you learned how to turn lead into gold?" Ron asked, bewildered. Harry raised an eyebrow. "Alchemy? Headmaster Dumbledore is an alchemist too. He gave me an ever-blooming flower for Christmas." "That was Dumbledore using alchemy to fuse magic with special plants. This flower even changes color with my mood," Hermione said. "Hey, why didn't Dumbledore give me a present?" Ron protested, clutching his plate. Neither Harry nor Hermione paid him any mind. Hermione quickly flipped through the book. "Nicholas Flamel, the man we've been trying to find, is an alchemist. And get this, he's from the 14th century. This book records many of his alchemical creations, including the Philosopher's Stone," Hermione continued. Harry blinked. 14th century? That's hundreds of years ago." Ron blurted, "So the person we're looking for is from hundreds of years ago. No wonder we never found Nicholas Flamel in the current Wizarding World Hall of Fame when we searched the library." Hermione shot him an unfriendly look. "Stop the nonsense and listen." Dylan, seated beside them, had overheard. Hermione's glare at Ron triggered a memory from his previous life. One of those internet theories people obsess over. He'd once read a forum post claiming Ron Weasley had used Imperio on Hermione to make her fall in love with him. The thread's author argued that Ron's relationship with Hermione had always been fraught, that their personalities clashed, and that Ron's exposure to the dark arts had unhinged him. They pointed to the climax, Ron's emotional breakdown when he wore the locket Horcrux, and to his apparent proficiency with Unforgivable Curses after Professor Moody taught them in that one class. The post even claimed Ron successfully used Imperio on the goblin Griffhook later in the story. Dylan had taken that theory seriously for 3 days before laughing it off. That, he thought, was how unofficial histories were born. Details get twisted, actors and authors get mixed up, and imaginative readers fill in the gaps. In the original tale, it wasn't Ron who used Imperio on Griffhook. If anything, it was Harry. And people on the forum had quickly answered the theory with another rebuttal. Ron was simply charming in the books, possessed of a sort of natural charisma that would make any woman attracted to him. The responses had accused the original poster of being the one under Imperio. Dylan still remembered laughing about those comment threads for days. He also reminded himself that this world didn't always line up perfectly with the books or the movies. Sometimes it was one, sometimes the other, sometimes both. He'd lived here 10 years. Whatever the version, he could learn magic and handle what came next. You tell us, Ron urged, spearing a sausage with his fork. Hermione lowered her voice and kept flipping pages. According to this book, Nicholas Flamel is the greatest alchemist in history. He created the Philosopher's Stone over 600 years ago. The book says the stone can turn lead into gold, transforming base metals into pure gold, Hermione read, eyes shining. It can also create the elixir of life, which grants the drinker immortality. Harry and Ron stared. None of them had known about the elixir of life. The Philosopher's Stone does that? Harry asked. Dylan finished the last of his durian, nodded to himself. If the stone could do more than grant immortality, if it could produce gold, Dylan's mind drifted in practical directions. With that kind of power, he could secure money for his parents, pay off whatever the mysterious system demanded. Even if it charged him 10 million pounds, he'd be fine. He dabbed his mouth with a tissue and thought about other tricks too, devaluing the pound or acquiring currency by other means, and whether the system would recognize that as legitimate for the spell refinement fees. Hermione was back on the page. Nicholas Flamel has lived from the 14th century until now. He still has the only Philosopher's Stone in the wizarding world. I even checked. Flamel celebrated his 665th birthday last year, she added. Ron made a face. Did you really need to look that up? Couldn't you just calculate it? Hermione glared. You're being needlessly annoying. Harry's eyes lit up. If we know who Nicholas Flamel is, does that mean what Fluffy is guarding is the Philosopher's Stone? Hermione nodded emphatically. Yes, that's exactly it. She looked at Dylan with gratitude. This is all thanks to him. If he hadn't given me the book, we might never have found out who Flamel is. Dylan blinked. I just noticed you liked studying, so I gave you something to read. That's all. Hermione smiled. Still, thank you for the lead. And it helps that I was bored at home and read the whole thing, she added. Otherwise, I wouldn't have figured it out. Ron swallowed his sausage and shivered. Bored and not playing games or looking for fun, but reading a book. He shook his head. I still don't get you, Hermione. Chapter 65. Dylan, teach me. The holidays were over and classes resumed. Hermione, Harry, and the others had learned what the thing Cerberus was guarding really was, and once they knew the truth, the Philosopher's Stone stopped occupying their thoughts so much. They were first years, after all. Their insistence had been more childish curiosity than anything else. Besides, Harry had been far too busy lately. For the next Quidditch match, Gryffindor had to accept Professor Snape as the referee. Given Snape's usual attitude toward Harry, and toward Gryffindor in general, the whole team, not just Wood, suspected he'd be watching them like a hawk, waiting for any excuse to dock points. Training under Wood's exacting eye had become tense and oppressive. Everyone's moves were criticized and adjusted incessantly. No one was spared, not even Harry. Later that night, when Dylan returned to the dormitory, after almost slipping out toward the Forbidden Forest, he found Harry sprawled on his bed, looking utterly defeated. Dylan pursed his lips. I learned a new spell that helps you relax when you're worn out from studying. Want to try? Harry tried to sit up at the sound of it. He managed to lift his head with effort and brightened a little. Of course. Dylan nodded, raised his wand and murmured, Serenitas Lux. A soft pink glow bloomed from the wand tip. When it touched Harry, tiny particles merged into him, and his taut nerves loosened. He stretched and yawned. Wow, amazing. I feel like I just had a proper sleep. I found it in a very old book. If you want to learn it, I can teach you, Dylan offered. Really? Dylan, teach me. Harry's spirits picked up immediately. Dylan explained the key points briefly. The spell wasn't complicated, practical and easy to learn. Put the emphasis on the second syllable, re, in the first word, he instructed, and emphasize the second word. Say it smoothly and hold it a little. Let your breath out steadily as you cast. Some parts should be pronounced clearly, others can be softer. Under Dylan's guidance, Harry caught on quickly. After a dozen tries, he had the rhythm and intonation down. By the time Ron and Neville came back, they found Dylan teaching Harry the charm. What are you two learning? Ron asked, trudging in. Harry grinned, wand in hand. A very useful spell. With a mischievous look, he flicked his wand at Ron. Serenitas Lux. A golden ribbon of light shot from Harry's wand and wrapped around Ron. Startled, Ron recoiled, and Neville watched with wide eyes. When the glow seeped into Ron, the heavy tiredness he'd been carrying seemed to lift like a breeze. His eyelids cleared, and his head felt noticeably lighter. What is that? Ron blinked in disbelief. Wariness vanishes. Dylan taught me, Harry said proudly. Ron looked at Dylan eagerly. You've been secretly teaching magic in the dormitory? Let me learn it. Dylan smiled faintly. It was only a simple charm. Teaching it wasn't a burden. He showed Ron and Neville the spell, and later Seamus as well. But despite repeated tries, Ron still couldn't get it right. Dylan finally understood why Hermione was always on his case. It's late, he said. I'll teach you tomorrow. Just one more time. The last time, I promise, Ron pleaded. Dylan packed the books he'd need for class and stored them in his bag, then placed the bag in the system panel. He glanced back at Ron. You said the same thing when Neville learned it. Ron laughed awkwardly. Dylan shook his head. Don't worry. You want to learn. I'll teach you, but not tonight. I need to get ready for bed. Ron sighed and nodded, a little dejected. All right. As they settled down, Ron and Harry talked about the Quidditch match and Professor Snape. Ron lay with his hands behind his head, puzzled. That greasy-haired bloke looks like he wants to eat you alive. I didn't expect him to protect you from Quirrell. Harry shrugged. I don't understand it either. Dylan tidied up, giving himself a quick scourgify, then lay down and tucked Coalball into his arms. Anyway, protecting students is a teacher's duty. Maybe Snape's not as bad as he seems. Maybe he's just awkward at showing it. Ron snorted. Awkward? He could choke someone with one sentence. You were right there the last time he snapped at me. Didn't you hear what he said? Ron began, imitating Snape with relish. Mr. Weasley, is your brain full of cockroaches, or have you turned your head into a cauldron of Bertie Bott's every flavor beans? Ron continued in Snape's cutting tone. Are your hands under a stunning charm? You can't even hold the ingredients steady. Potions isn't for you. Maybe wiping windows at Honeydukes in Hogsmeade would suit you better. His impression was uncannily accurate, the words and tone making everyone stifle laughter. Sometimes you're pretty sharp-tongued too, Dylan, Ron added, turning to him. On that score, you would have fit right in at Slytherin. Dylan quirked an eyebrow and rolled his eyes. Ron, since you know I can be blunt, are you still going to keep teasing me? Ron's mouth pressed into a line. He hunched his shoulders inward for a moment, then let out an embarrassed chuckle. Well then, we should probably get some sleep. We have a lot of lessons tomorrow, don't we? With that, Ron rolled over quickly, burying half his head under the covers. Dylan merely shook his head and said nothing. Neville and Seamus snickered. The night passed without incident. The next day, Ron kept his distance from Dylan. Dylan ignored him and, after charms, went to Professor McGonagall's office. He was nervous. He planned to ask if he could practice transfiguration in an actual duel, but he wasn't sure how she'd take the idea. He lingered outside the door for a long time, pacing and staring at the wood, unable to bring himself to knock. Then, without warning, the door swung open. Come in, Professor McGonagall said crisply. Dylan was momentarily stunned. His legs had already carried him through. McGonagall sat behind a large oak desk, spectacles perched on her nose, a faint look of curiosity in her gaze. Why didn't you knock? She asked. Dylan cleared his throat and forced a laugh. I got lost in thought. I was standing there, trying to figure out what to say. She took no offense. Instead, she waved the matter away with a small nod and told him to take out his notebook. For the next while, she answered his questions one by one, explaining finer points of spell shaping and secondary forms. Toward the end, she looked at him with something softer in her expression. Your understanding of transfiguration is already very sound, she said. At this stage, I can guide you in the broader direction of your studies and help you refine your shaping, especially the secondary shaping. Encouragement swelled inside him. Dylan took a breath, steadied himself, and blurted, Professor McGonagall, since my theory is fairly solid, could we have a practical transfiguration duel? I want to test myself, and I think I could learn a great deal from facing you. Her quill paused. Surprise flickered across her face, but not displeasure. Dylan could see the rare approval in her eyes at a student volunteering to duel a professor. After a thoughtful moment, her lips curved. Dylan, that courage and initiative are very Gryffindor. I'm pleased to see them. She rose, walked to the center of the room, and raised her wand. Very well. Show me what you can do. Dylan's heart leapt. He rose and took his position, aware that McGonagall expected him to make the first move. He didn't aim a spell at her immediately. Instead, he focused on the paperweight on the desk. He flicked his wand and shouted, "Transfiguration shift!" A pink light shot from his wand and struck the paperweight. In an instant, it transformed into a squirrel, bushy tail flicking, which scampered toward McGonagall with a series of high-pitched squeaks. He'd hoped bringing another object to life and sending it at her would trigger some sort of confirmation of success. He waited for a signal in the back of his mind. Nothing came. The thought nagged at him. A squirrel can't hurt anyone. McGonagall did not hurry. A faint approving glint lit her eyes, and she uttered, "Form reconstruction." A soft green light enveloped the squirrel. It gleamed and reshaped until it was an exquisite crystal brooch, catching the light in a cascade of colors. It dropped, perfectly formed, into McGonagall's waiting hand. Dylan's breath stuck in his throat. Overriding a transfigured object with new magic required completely overwhelming the original transfiguration, something she had done effortlessly. It was a small thing, but it laid bare how far ahead she still was. He didn't falter. He glanced toward an umbrella propped in the corner and flicked his wand. Property transformation! The umbrella writhed and elongated into a cobra, rearing with a triangular head and a flicking tongue. It slithered toward the professor, hissing. "Not bad," McGonagall said, almost amused. "Choosing similar objects for transformation will usually give you a higher chance of success." She turned, made an elegant arc with her wand, and intoned, "Reverse incantation." A blade-bright, silvery-white light struck the cobra. In an instant, the venomous snake unmade and snapped back into the umbrella, which clattered to the floor with a crisp thud as its ribs closed. Dylan narrowed his eyes. His timing was close. He lifted his voice and warned, "Watch out, Professor!" He thrust his wand at her and cried, "Vera Verto!" A surge of pink magic leapt from his wand like a streaking comet, one screaming in its wake. He poured everything into it. "A spell doesn't get stronger because you shout louder," McGonagall remarked with a small chuckle. She held her wand steady and replied, "Vera Verto." Her counterspell was not as showy as his, but far denser, concentrated like a coiled dragon. The two streams of magic met with a thunderous crack, filling the office with searing light. Magical shockwaves rolled outward, papers fluttering and books rattling. McGonagall stood unmoved. Dylan's feet began to slide backward as her power pressed in on his. He planted himself, trying to drive more energy into his wand, struggling to keep his beam from breaking. Pressure mounted. His spell wavered under the sustained onslaught. Then, in the middle of the blinding collision, something wholly unexpected happened. A plump, pink piglet blinked into existence, snorting and looking around with bright, bewildered eyes. "Oink oink," it squealed. Dylan was wrapped in Professor McGonagall's magic, and the world suddenly flipped upside down. What had been at eye level was now over him. Professor McGonagall's face looming above, the ordinary desk a sheer cliff. He tried to lift a hand and saw, to his dismay, two short, pink, smooth little trotters flailing in front of him. He went utterly blank. He opened his mouth to beg her to reverse the spell, but only "oink, oink" came out. The sound made him shrivel inward with embarrassment. His ears drooped. He tried to move, but his stubby legs felt like overcooked noodles, and with one weak step he collapsed in a wet little plop. He frantically motioned toward McGonagall, but his clumsy hoof-like trotters refused to obey, only flailing helplessly. "Oink! Oink!" McGonagall watched the piglet Dylan scrabble and tumble on the floor, trying to regain his footing, and she couldn't help smiling. The strictness in her face melted away. Her laughter rang clear and warm through her office. "Dylan, don't panic," she chuckled, waved her wand, and murmured, "It's not every day I see something like this. I'll keep a memento." With a soft whoosh, a small, exquisite, enchanted camera appeared in the air. It adjusted itself and trained its lens on the struggling piglet. The little device zipped back and forth, weaving around him, and the shutters began to snap. Click, click, capturing his every bewildered move. Dylan tried to hide, but the camera caught him in a dozen comical, disheveled poses. Finally, he gave up. He shuffled to face the corner, covered his face with his two small trotters, pointed his rump toward McGonagall, and sulked. He felt numb, like nothing could sting him further. Oink oink! McGonagall's smile widened. She levitated the camera toward herself. Photographs drifted out one by one, and she plucked them from the air, holding up one after another to look at the adorable, if mortified, Dylan. She looked pleased beyond measure. Then she raised her wand and gave it a practiced sweep. Veriverto! A warm glow enveloped him again. Dylan felt his body shifting, reshaping, and in moments he reverted to his human form. He was still sitting on the floor when the spell ended. He stared at his restored hands, cheeks burning with shame and a new determination hardening inside him. I have to. No, I will get much better at spells. From now on, he'd be getting up at 3 in the morning. He would study until he dropped, but he would master this. He was not going to be turned into a pig again. Seeing Dylan still sulking, McGonagall tried to suppress the smile tugging at her lips, but failed. She swept her wand, and he felt a gentle magical lift helping him to his feet. She came over and patted his shoulder. An experience like that stays with you, she said. It's memorable for both of us. I don't often duel in Transfiguration with first-year students. This was a first for me, too. Professor McGonagall, Dylan began, indignation and residual embarrassment mingling in his voice. She smiled and pulled out a chair for him. All right, no more teasing. She sat opposite him. While you were under the Transfiguration, you could feel the magic working on your body, couldn't you? Dylan thought for a moment and nodded. That's exactly why I did it, she said gently, the corners of her eyes softening. This isn't just a prank. Experiencing the spell's effect firsthand is an invaluable learning tool. You've now gone through the entire process of transfiguration applied to a human body, she continued. When a spell reshapes you, you can feel the flow and discipline of magic in a way that textbooks alone can't convey. Revni, that personal experience will elevate your understanding from abstract theory to practical intuition. Later, when you study transfiguration seriously, recall how today felt. It will help you gauge the amount of magic needed and how it must be controlled. Transfiguration is about precise control and an exploration of magic's essence. She patted his shoulder again, looking a little wistful. When my own professor taught me transfiguration, he turned me into a cough. She nearly let something slip, then broke off with a small, secretive smile. Dylan's eyes widened. Your transfiguration professor was Headmaster Dumbledore, wasn't he? McGonagall cleared her throat and steered away from the subject. In any case, although I could have simply dispelled the spell, I wanted you to experience it. It will help when you begin animagus studies. We were having a duel, after all, she added. We were, Dylan muttered, but I really don't want my animagus form to be a pig. McGonagall laughed so hard she shook. Don't worry, you won't become whatever I turned you into. Dylan let out a relieved breath. He'd reached level 7 proficiency in transfiguration, but he hadn't advanced to level 8 precisely because he hadn't begun animagus training. It wasn't that he didn't want to know his animagus form. McGonagall insisted that students master the theory and gain a strong practical foundation first. He agreed. At Hogwarts, students generally needed the higher years transfiguration knowledge before even attempting animagus, and that was only the start. The animagus process is perilously complex. One mistake can have serious consequences, so the ministry tightly controls registration. Wizards must undergo lengthy study, training, and assessment to ensure they can perform the magic safely before being registered. For now, Dylan still didn't know what creature he would one day be. Hopefully, it wouldn't be the little oinking fellow from just now. Chapter 68, Achievement Unlocked, Attacking a Professor. Feeling the aftershocks of the transfiguration, Dylan nodded toward Professor McGonagall. Thank you for your trouble. He couldn't help the odd mixture of emotions that followed. He'd just been turned into a pig, and yet here he was thanking her for doing her job. Was there any justice left in the world? As he left McGonagall's office, Dylan walked along the corridor and checked the achievement system's notifications. The first message popped up like a bratty whisper. Message, you bold, rotten little wizard, actually cast transfiguration on Professor McGonagall. Then another alert appeared. You have achieved a new achievement. Dylan had meant only to check whether his refined task had been completed. Instead, the achievement panel opened and displayed Achievement, Attacking a Professor. 2. Description, don't think no one knows your little thoughts. You actually planned to mutate the professor into a monstrous deformity, didn't you? Brilliant idea. Keep practicing. Make that long-cherished wish a reality soon. Unlock requirement. Cast Transfiguration on a Hogwarts professor with the intent to transform them into a deformed monster. Achievement reward. Max level intermediate spell +1. Dylan stared at it. Was the system implying he wanted to turn McGonagall into some grotesque creature? He'd never intended that. But then he looked at the reward. A max level intermediate spell? He said, surprised and pleased despite himself. Well, whatever the system thinks, I'll take the reward. He glanced back at the system panel, concentrated, and something like the edge of the universe opened in his mind. Darkness stretched boundless around him, and one distant star hung above like a jewel. The star trembled, flared, and then rivers of light poured from it into him. A faint, dense sound of wings grew in the distance. In an instant, the sky filled with birds. They swarmed and spiraled around him, starlight flecked between their wings like glitter. Dylan tilted his head, watching. The flock shifted. Sometimes they braided into a winding dragon, sometimes stamped like galloping horses. Wind whipped through his hair, and his robes snapped as if a gale passed by. Then the system chimed. Message. Congratulations. You have mastered the max-level spell, Bird Conjuring Charm. He knew the Bird Conjuring Charm. He'd studied summoning spells along with Transfiguration. But this was different. The hazy, technical feel he'd had before vanished. Instead, there was a direct, intimate connection to the birds, as if each one were an extension of his own body. A single thought made them wheel, dive, or arrange themselves into intricate formations with absolute precision. The control was effortless and intoxicating. He found himself wanting, almost aching, to become a bird and soar. Dylan had already raised his wand. A sharp, piercing bird cry snapped him out of it, clearing his head. He blinked, the look of rapture draining from his face. For a moment he felt shaken. Could mastering a spell really make you lose yourself? He muttered. He thought of how completely enraptured he'd been and felt a new wariness. Maybe that cry had been the system's warning. Dylan squared his shoulders. I learned magic to make it a tool, he told himself, not to be ruled by it. He took a few steadying breaths and moved to check whether his refined task had been completed. Not far ahead, a commotion broke out in the corridor. Malfoy was holding something aloft and taunting Neville. That's my Remembrall! Give it back! Neville's face was flushed. He reached desperately for the glass globe Malfoy dangled just out of reach. Malfoy smirked and waved it higher. Look at this, Malfoy sneered. The Longbottom family heirloom. Or is it a little trinket to help you remember how useless you are? You're friends with Potter? He went on cruelly. Using a Remembrall. What are you going to remember? Where you left your brain? Neville's face went redder with humiliation and anger. He lunged and missed. Malfoy laughed and shoved him, then flicked his wand free with one hand. Leglocker curse, he spat. Dylan didn't hesitate. Without a wand, he cast the Bird Conjuring Charm. A lithe bird flashed into existence and shot straight at Malfoy's face. The bird struck with a harsh, rattling impact. Malfoy yelped and stumbled back, the Remembrall and his wand flying from his hands. The unexpected blow interrupted the Leglocker curse instantly. Neville lunged forward and snatched the Remembrall before it hit the floor. Malfoy's wand thudded against the corridor flagstones. Neville looked up at Dylan, breathless and astonished, his cheeks still flushed. Dylan! Chapter 69. That damned Dylan. Did he cast Imperio on Professor Snape? The name made Malfoy freeze. He spun around, and when he saw who had spoken, didn't bother to answer, only shot a venomous glare. His pale cheek still showed the fresh scratches where a bird's claws had raked him. Malfoy, Dylan said evenly, have I ever told you not to pick on my friends? Malfoy's expression faltered. When did you ever say that? Dylan watched him, amused. I don't think I ever did. He let the words hang for a moment, then added, I'm saying it now. Malfoy's mouth flattened. You're really meddlesome, he spat. Dylan paid his glare no mind. He raised a hand and beckoned to the bird that was still circling above Malfoy's head. The creature folded its wings and flew to land on Dylan's shoulder, nuzzling his neck. Dylan stroked its forehead. A faint ripple of magic flowed from his palm, and the bird's outline shimmered until it blurred out of existence. Both Malfoy and Neville stared. "You can do magic without a wand?" Malfoy's disdain gave way to astonishment. "Good heavens, Dylan. Since when?" Neville's round face shone with admiration. Dylan smiled. "I don't like bullies. I won't stand for anyone picking on my mates." "You're a little wizard yourself," Malfoy snapped, recovering himself. He was red with anger now. "Don't you dare order me around. I'm a Slytherin." "Oh," Dylan's voice was teasing. "Although I do brew potions with Professor Snape sometimes, I didn't think." He let the implication trail off. Malfoy's face twisted. He remembered passing Snape's classroom earlier and peering through the small window, watching, jealously, Snape bending over a potion cauldron while Dylan stood beside him, listening to the professor's instructions. The sight had set something burning in Draco's chest. Why would Snape give that Gryffindor individualized attention? A pure-blood Slytherin like him deserved that kind of notice. He had begged Snape for help and had only been refused. It wasn't fair. "He's tutoring you?" Malfoy snapped, voice cracking with irritation and envy. "Did you put Imperio on him, Dylan? Is that what you did?" Dylan's lips twitched. "No answer? Want me to write to Professor Snape? Or tell him in person next week when I go for tutoring that a student from his house uses magic to bully classmates?" The idea of Snape knowing about him, of Snape seeing him as a troublemaker, sent Malfoy over the edge. His face went beet red. With a huff, his robe swished and he stormed off down the corridor. Dylan's gaze dropped to the wand lying on the stone floor where Malfoy had just been standing. He clicked his tongue and sighed. "Tsk." He raised his own wand and said the charm softly, "Wingardium Leviosa." Malfoy's wand trembled, lifted, arced gracefully through the air, and landed neatly in front of him, even though Malfoy had already walked a good 10 meters away. The boy stopped short. He looked back at the familiar wand, then patted his pockets in an embarrassed, almost sheepish fumble. He must have dropped it. For a moment, Malfoy's indignation cracked and something more complicated crossed his face. He hadn't expected Dylan to return the wand. He'd expected mockery, or for Dylan to parade it around. Instead, Dylan had simply returned it. Draco hesitated, then picked it up. "Thank you, Dylan," he muttered awkwardly. "I owe you." Malfoy's steps slowed. He turned, not in a swagger, but with a pensive, unsettled pace, and disappeared around the corridor corner. Neville looked up at Dylan with a face so open and grateful it made Dylan's chest warm. For a second, Dylan's mind flashed to a different memory. Professor McGonagall's office, and the time he'd misfired a transfiguration spell. But he shook it off. No, he thought, and smiled. He wasn't going to imagine Neville as anything less than a friend. "It's all right," Dylan said. "Come on, let's hurry. Dinner's getting cold." Neville clutched the small glass sphere his grandmother had given him and hurried along. They found Harry and the others still at the Gryffindor table. Neville launched into the tale as soon as he sat down. Ron and Hermione leaned in. "Wandless charms?" Hermione's eyes were wide with disbelief. "You learned wandless magic in your first year? I can't even get a mouse to budge without my wand." Dylan shrugged, feigning modesty. "Maybe Merlin just smiles on me." Hermione's jaw dropped. Harry and Ron exchanged stunned looks. Neville gushed some more. "He's brilliant. If it wasn't for Dylan, Malfoy would have locked my legs for sure." Dylan waved a hand and grinned at his newest admirer. He reached for a plate and helped himself to a large steak, pleased with the victory that had required far more restraint than he'd expected. Chapter 70, Features. Instantaneous without lag. "Actually, this can't be considered true wandless magic," Dylan said casually. "I can't do this with other spells yet. It's just that I'm more familiar with the summoning charm. I've practiced it at least 1,000 times. He shrugged as if it were nothing, not caring whether Hermione and the others believed him. Who could verify whether he'd practiced a spell 1,000 times to achieve wandless casting for a single charm? If he said he had, then he had. Hermione blinked and made a mental note. She wanted to go back and try practicing a spell 1,000 times too. Maybe then she could cast wandlessly like Dylan. Wandless magic was rare. Even many adult wizards couldn't do it. "But Neville, you really should be braver and stand up to Malfoy," Ron said, looking at Neville. Yeah, if Dylan hadn't happened to pass by today, he would have played a trick on you again. Seamus nodded. Harry looked from the two of them to Neville and blinked twice. They're right. Neville puffed out his cheeks. Humph. I've almost finished raising the flame thorns. When it's ready, I'll give it back to Professor Sprout and try to get a mandrake seed. Hermione's eyebrows shot up and her mouth fell open. What do you want to do? Neville, even as a young wizard, murder will be punished by the Ministry of Magic. Neville glanced at Hermione. I won't let the mandrake fully mature. If it's just sprouted and the toxicity isn't strong yet, I'll cut off a stem and leaf and put it into Malfoy's bread. He'll be vomiting all day. Harry, Ron, and the others nearby were startled. When had Neville become so fierce? Dylan's eyelids twitched. Neville, if the professors find out, you'll be punished too. Think carefully. Neville listened and nodded. All right, Dylan, I'll listen to you. But if Malfoy bothers me again, for example, if he tries to snatch the remembrall my grandmother sent me, I'll make him pay. Dylan gave a slight nod and said no more. Since the term began, Neville had learned a lot about herbology, and under Dylan's influence, he'd grown more confident. Dylan trusted Neville would know his limits. After dinner, Dylan didn't head to the library. He went straight back to the dormitory. Neville stayed to tend his flame thorns, Seamus went off with Dean, and Harry and Ron went to the Quidditch pitch. The dormitory was quiet, exactly what Dylan wanted. He took off his wizard robes and used Scourgify on himself, then sat on his bed. Coalball immediately bounded over and mooed softly. Dylan stroked the little creature's head and rubbed its chin until it purred contentedly. After sleeping in his arms so often, it had long since lost any aloofness and become very clingy. You've grown a lot, he murmured, holding Coalball. Even in the warm dormitory, he felt a chill after removing his robes. Looks like I need to buy a few more, although the beautifying effect of wizard robes can't be permanently fixed. A thought struck him. Why don't I just transform all these robes into clothes I want to wear? Then I wouldn't have to transform them back into robes every time. When he wanted to wear them, he could take them out. When he didn't, he could slot them back into the item storage in his system panel. Good idea. Why didn't I think of that sooner? Dylan jotted it down and then looked up at his system panel. After everything that had happened, he finally had time to check whether the Transfiguration Mastery quest had completed. Message: You have completed the Transfiguration Mastery quest. You have unlocked a new transfiguration trait, instantaneous transformation. Dylan's eyes lit up. He quickly pulled up the specifics. When using transfiguration, you can complete the transformation instantly with no time delay. The moment you form the thought to change, the target will take on the new shape you envision. Note: whether the transformation succeeds depends on your spell proficiency and the target's magic resistance. A truly powerful trait, Dylan breathed. Even reaching the highest normal level of transfiguration wouldn't normally let a wizard transform something purely by thought instantaneously. And casting a transformation directly in his mind, wasn't that a kind of wandless casting too? Eager to test it, Dylan didn't raise his wand. He focused on an ink bottle sitting on the desk. He formed a clear image in his mind, a majestic eagle, wings spread, and mentally chanted the spell as his magic stirred. Almost at once, a dazzling light erupted from the ink bottle. When it faded, the ink bottle was gone, replaced by a lifelike eagle sculpture standing proudly, wings slightly spread as if about to take flight. Huh. Exactly like the eagle I bumped into in the corridor when I first arrived, Dylan said, narrowing his eyes with a small smile. He used transfiguration again, this time pushing further and invoking the other magic traits he'd mastered. In his mind, he rapidly conjured 10 different objects. With a swish of thought, the magic leapt into the eagle sculpture. Blinding light burst forth. In the blink of an eye, the eagle became a nimble rabbit that hopped once. Another flash, and the rabbit turned into a thick, ancient magic tome, its pages flipping on their own. Then another transformation, and another, the sequence cascaded one after the other with no lag. Finally, a last ray of light struck whatever it had become, and a vibrant rose bloomed. The rose shifted into a white dove that flapped its wings and flew to the table. With a final thought from Dylan, the dove transformed back into the ink bottle, sitting exactly where it had been. Not bad, he said, satisfied. With my current level 7 transfiguration and instantaneous transformation, I can go toe-to-toe with a lot of adult wizards. Chapter 71, Deathly Hallows Experience Card purchased for 10,000 galleons. With the new transfiguration properties, plus my own ability to cast spells in quick succession. As long as I don't face a professor, I'm not without the power to fight. Dylan spent a moment thinking, planning to sneak into the Forbidden Forest that night. But my concealment spell isn't perfect. If I run into a master wizard, there's a good chance I'll be discovered. He considered borrowing Harry's invisibility cloak, but he didn't want Harry to know he was sneaking out at night. Harry would probably force his way along. After a moment, Dylan glanced at his wizard robe. I'll try the beautification feature. If I can turn my robe into an invisibility cloak, I won't have to bother Harry. He took out his spare robe. If it only made the fabric transparent, he'd still be wearing the Emperor's new clothes and wouldn't be hidden. At the very least, it has to make the wearer invisible. No sooner had he decided than the system popped up. Message: according to your idea, would you like to spend 100 galleons to beautify your wizard robe? Yes? No? Dylan confirmed. After deducting 100 galleons, the robe gradually lost its color until it became translucent and formless. He stood up from the bed and put it on, but although he could feel the weight of the robe, his body did not vanish. It didn't work, he sighed. Harry's invisibility cloak was a deathly hallow, old, powerful, and priceless. Ordinary invisibility cloaks, usually woven from demiguy's hair, had time limits and were easy to see through. They weren't in the same league. I shouldn't expect to make something comparable to a deathly hallow for only 100 galleons. He was about to change back when the system pinged again. Message: the disguise function can provide various concealment effects. For advanced beautification, additional galleons are required. Dylan froze, then grinned. So that's how it worked. This wasn't an achievement system at all. It was a straight pay-to-win setup. Excited, he mapped out a more ambitious plan and sent another request. Message: according to your idea, would you like to spend 10,000 galleons to beautify your wizard robe? Yes, no? 10,000 galleons? Instead of discouraging him, the number delighted Dylan. I didn't expect the robe's beautification to have such an option. He clicked confirm. The money was withdrawn, but another prompt appeared. Message: please note, advanced properties cannot be permanently saved. Do you wish to continue the operation? Yes, no? Cannot be permanently saved? Dylan blinked. 10,000 galleons, and the effect isn't permanent? He felt an irrational urge to complain. Sure, there were other invisibility cloaks in the world, some even rivaling Harry's if crafted by an alchemist, and he could have Dumbledore make him one. What if the effect lasted only a day? Would he be paying every time he wanted to be invisible? It all felt a little like being cheated. After a moment of hesitation, he sighed and shrugged. It's just 10,000 galleons. Money is meant to be spent. If it's gone, I'll earn more. Dylan comforted himself further. He could always write home to his parents and ask them to send more. With that decided, he confirmed the operation and watched the numbers drop again. Then the robe and the air around him changed. He raised his hand and waved it in front of his face. He could feel the breeze, but all he saw was empty air. He paced around the dormitory, heart racing. His figure no longer registered in the mirror. He searched for flaws, but found none. As long as he kept the robe on, he was perfectly invisible. Did I just turn 10,000 galleons into another deathly hallow? He thought. It felt like money well spent. He had assumed the beautified effect would be inferior to Harry's cloak, but this was indistinguishable. He only had to wonder how long it would last. Dylan checked the system panel. Invisible wizard robe. A beautified wizard robe that conceals the wearer's figure. Note, the invisibility effect will expire after 100 hours. Only 100 hours? A little over 4 days, neither long nor short. Dylan accepted it. Fine, I'll think of it as buying a Deathly Hallow experience card for 10,000 galleons. 4 days isn't nothing. He smiled, a little misty-eyed at the expense, and resolved to spend the next day in the library researching how invisibility cloaks were made. Harry and Neville and the others drifted back to the dormitory one by one. Dylan read for a while longer until it was nearly lights out. He pretended to go to bed, and before he knew it, he had actually fallen asleep. Harry and Ron exchanged a look, voices lowered to whispers as they tidied and climbed into their beds. Only in the dead of night did Colball nudge Dylan's chest with his small head. That was when Dylan woke up. "How did I fall asleep?" he murmured, glancing at the clock. Dawn was almost here. He felt surprisingly refreshed, no need for a wakefulness charm. He looked at the sleeping figures around him, slipped out the invisibility cloak, let it fall over himself, and vanished. Silencio, he thought, flicking his wand to steady the silencing charm on himself. Then he eased out of bed and crept from the dormitory. Hogwarts was impossibly quiet at that hour. Filch was still on his rounds. Dylan could hear the scrape of his boots down a corridor. Oh, Filch really should give Mrs. Norris a bath, he thought with a private smirk at the cat's endless stench. Keeping low and careful, he skirted past Filch's patrol and left the castle. Outside the Forbidden Forest, Hagrid patrolled with a large lamp, sweeping the edges to make sure no one slipped in and nothing slipped out. Fang trailed at his heels, pressed to Hagrid's leg, unwilling to go far. Dylan didn't go up to Hagrid. He found a thinner patch of underbrush and slipped beneath the trees. The forest closed around him. The damp, loamy scent of earth and decaying leaves rose immediately. Branches knit together overhead, and the ground was a thick carpet of rotten leaves. Dylan kept the silencing charm active. His footsteps made no more than a ghost of a rustle. He kept the invisibility cloak on and his robes unbothered, moving carefully through the gloom. Something rustled in the leaves nearby. He turned and, in the faint light, made out a small hedgehog-like animal busily rooting in the litter. A puffskein? The creature's quills bristled as it sniffed the air and turned its little head from side to side. It hadn't seen him. Perhaps it had merely sensed a presence. Dylan watched it for a moment, then left it to its foraging. Puffskein materials weren't worth the bother in person. He could buy them if he needed them. A patch of grass ahead glowed with a soft blue light. Dylan crouched and gathered a little glow grass. Not rare, but it would be useful for an illuminating potion. He dropped it into the item slot of his system panel and pressed on. Deeper in, mushrooms dotted the trunks, some shining faintly with an eerie, poisonous brilliance. He avoided those. The Forbidden Forest was a catalog of dangerous life. Dylan stopped at a set of hoofprints. He knelt to study them, thinking of the descriptions in Fantastic Beasts. The easiest way to tell a centaur's prints from a unicorn's or a horse's was weight distribution. Centaurs left heavier, deeper front prints. These tracks were even, balanced, not deeper in front, which suggested an ordinary equine magical creature, maybe even a unicorn. He straightened, grinning at the thought. If he did find a unicorn, he fancied, in a ridiculous aside, grinding horn into powder. Not the sort of thing he planned to do, of course, but the idea flicked through his mind. He collected what he could on the way. Aconite for potions, black hellebore that could disrupt spells, a fragment of bicorn horn that might go into a polyjuice brew. After wandering for a good while, he realized he'd lost his bearings. He'd tried to follow a planned route, but the forest had folded around him and taken him elsewhere. There were no clear signs of Acromantula. Hagrid's patrols usually left obvious tracks, but he hadn't been near any spider territory lately. At least, Dylan didn't see the clues that would lead him there. He stopped, pulled a dry tea leaf from his pocket, and settled beside a mossy boulder. Good thing he'd asked Professor Trelawney to teach him a practical method. Tea leaf reading was quick, portable, and not as maddeningly vague as the rest of divination. It fit his style, a little Eastern-style divination with wizarding trimmings. He took a cup from his item slot, a mundane cup that had been deposited there long ago, poured water into it, and murmured Califacio. A warm current of magic flowed into the cup, and the water smoked and boiled. He dropped the tea leaf in, watched it unfurl, and when the brew had cooled enough, he drank most of it, leaving the leaf behind. He swirled the cup 3 times and inverted it, letting the remaining liquid settle the leaf along the inner curve. Then he set the cup down and watched. The tea leaf had collected into shapes against the porcelain. Dylan traced them with narrowed eyes, thinking of direction, of the Acromantula's lair. As the shadows shifted in the cup, he noticed a curious formation along the central vein of the leaf. A bold, almost deliberate arrow pointing right back at him. He frowned, unsettled and oddly amused at the same time. If the leaf was trying to tell him to look inward, it could mean anything from danger nearby to a warning that he'd been the cause of something. He stared at the tiny, dark arrow, feeling the forest around him press closer. Chapter 73. Take this Avada Kedavra from me. Should I go the other way? Dylan was still turning the divination over in his mind when a pungent, fishy stench hit him from above, followed by a sharp whoosh. He glanced up and froze. A massive acromantula was dropping out of the trees, fangs bared, legs spread to strike. Under the moonlight, its stiff hairs bristled, 8 eyes glinted with an oily green light, and its fangs gaped wide enough to tear him apart. Oh my God! The arrow was pointing at something above my head. There was no time to hesitate. Without even drawing his wand, Dylan shouted, "Bird conjuring charm." A black cloud of birds erupted around him, multiplying until they formed a writhing ball that slammed into the spider and sent it careening to the ground with a heavy thud. While the acromantula staggered, Dylan rode a whirlwind of birds that lifted him and carried him several meters away. "You little ambush me? Fine, don't blame me for dodging." He drew his wand as he landed. Crucio! A spray of soft pink light lanced out and struck the creature. It howled, a shrill, ear-splitting scream. Then Dylan cut the sound off with a flick. Quietus! Pink star-like motes swirled and muffled the spider's cries until even the sound of it thrashing on the dirt vanished. Humph. The Forbidden Forest is no joke. If I hadn't mastered high-level spells, I wouldn't have stood a chance. The acromantula writhed on the ground, its thick legs clawing at the soil, its exoskeleton showing fine cracks where it convulsed. That wasn't just Diffindo. Was that the bone gouging effect? He didn't want to watch it suffer, so Dylan raised his wand again. Imperio, a veil of light enveloped the spider. Its struggles stopped, it floated up as if puppeted. From the crown of its head, a faint, translucent wisp of soul drifted free. Dylan blinked. His first time using Imperio like this felt strange. He tapped the wisp lightly with his wand, and a flood of images slammed into his mind. Hunted prey thrashing, bloodied feeding grounds, dense tangles of smaller spiders, damp caverns. Visions of the nest, its layout, the cave entrance, rose clear and mapped themselves in his head. Found the nest. He released the Imperio and watched the wisp dissolve. For a moment, he considered starting the mastery quest for Imperio proper, but he had other practical needs. It was late, and the spider was badly damaged. Dylan reached into his pouch for a specially made potion vial and then, wary it might suddenly lunge, reasserted control. Imperio. The acromantula froze. He even extracted its soul and set it aside to be safe, then began collecting venom with steady hands. Its fangs were enormous, the venom potent. He worked until he'd gathered every drop he wanted. Next were the eyes. The spider's 8 green orbs glinted like jewels, even now, unblinking. Dylan steadied himself, controlled the tweezers with delicate pressure, and plucked an eye free, then another, carefully placing each into a small wooden box designed to preserve magical tissue. When he was done with the eyes, he hauled out a massive pair of enchanted shears he'd bought in Diagon Alley, sharp enough to cut magical steel. Using both hands, he cut open the underside of the abdomen and carefully harvested organs and the silk. There wasn't as much silk as he'd hoped. "Next time I'll make it scream more with Crucio," he muttered, half to himself. Most of the useful materials were gathered. He looked at the ruined body and then at its detached soul hovering nearby. Would it be right to let it go back now? He checked the time, past 3 o'clock, almost 4. No, he needed to get some sleep. He pushed the thought away, pointed his wand, and guided the soul back into the body. The torn creature shuddered, and Dylan couldn't help a wry comment as it came to, "Wait, don't die yet. Take one Avada Kedavra from me before you go." He raised his wand. Avada Kedavra! A green flash struck the acromantula. It died instantly. Then, despite the fact the creature was already dead, Dylan kept casting. Avada Kedavra! He repeated it over and over, watching the system notifications tick up in his mind. X10, X20, until at last he cast the final one with a flourish. He chuckled as he checked his quest panel. The acromantula had died on the first killing curse. True, but the mastery quest didn't forbid Kazans of Avada Kedavra spells at a corpse already felled by the killing curse. If that's what it took to finish the quest, then so be it. Chapter 74. The characteristics of the killing curse activate. Killing intent will burn the sky. Message: you have completed the refinement task for Avada Kedavra. Message: you have unlocked a new characteristic for Avada Kedavra, Luoyi Fen Tian. I actually completed it. Dylan broke into a smile. He hadn't expected to finish the refinement task for Avada Kedavra so easily. It seemed the task had been deceptively simple. He checked the killing curse's new characteristic. When you use the killing curse, you can, with yourself as the center, autonomously activate or deactivate a circular destruction domain with a radius of 4 meters and a duration of 4 seconds. Within this area, the energy of Avada Kedavra permeates and attacks all living creatures that enter. 1 second causes sluggishness, 2 seconds causes paralysis, and 3 seconds results in life harvest. Note: want to block my Avada Kedavra with a mirror? Then try this: Avada Kedavra Embrace. A domain? Is it really that powerful? Dylan couldn't help swallowing. Learning max-level Avada Kedavra was one thing. Being able to actually kill without landing a precise hit was another. Now, the system had basically given him an area of effect version of the killing curse. Anyone who stayed inside would die. A 4-meter radius was neither tiny nor huge. It could be extremely useful in a confined space, awkward in the open. If the enemy was in a small room, this would be devastating. In a field, he'd have to close the distance, and variables would multiply. The domain only lasted 4 seconds, and creatures inside didn't die instantly, like from a direct Avada Kedavra. They had to remain in the domain for 3 seconds to be killed. Dylan shook his head. It was still just an energy field produced after casting Avada Kedavra. As long as a target couldn't escape, even if they staggered out after 1 or 2 seconds, he could pursue and finish them. While they were slowed or paralyzed, he could simply cast another killing curse. Overall, the characteristic filled a major gap in his combat options and might become a crucial trump card. It would be perfect for ambushes. Dylan felt pleased. It hadn't been for nothing that he'd wandered the forbidden forest in the cold wind. He glanced down at the Acromantila's corpse and oddly felt grateful. The spider had, in its own way, helped him unlock this new trait. "I'll forgive you for ambushing me," he murmured. He raised his wand, and a pink fluffy rabbit wrapped in fiendfire leaped from the void and landed on the Acromantila. The pink flames were eerily beautiful, engulfing the corpse until not even ash remained. Watching such a large creature turn to dust stirred something in him. A strange, tingling sensation crept up from his chest and spread through his whole body, not pleasure, but a scalp-numbing electric feeling, like countless tiny currents clashing in his nerves. The Unforgivable Curses lived up to their name. There were many ways to kill: Defindo, Sectum Sempra, Fiendfire, but those spells all had counters. Avada Kedavra could not be stopped. A flash of light and a life ended, silently and undeniably. Death, that effortless, made it harder to appreciate how precious life was. Fortunately, Dylan was immune to the negative psychological effects of the dark arts. He didn't have to contend with the emotional corruption that typically came from using the Unforgivable Curses. If he kept his original intention clear, treating these spells as tools for study and defense, not as ends in themselves, he wouldn't become a murderous madman like Lord Voldemort. He studied magic so he wouldn't be used as a pawn or die needlessly like many characters in the original story. To do that, he had to be strong, so strong that even Voldemort, when they eventually met, would have to admit Dylan is superior. He also planned to research the relationship between immortality and magic, so his adoptive parents could live longer and fewer people would be killed. Maybe, after mastering enough magic, he could even travel to other worlds. Having already been transmigrated once, the idea of seeing other worlds drove a lot of his motivation. He checked the time, looked back toward the depths of the Forbidden Forest, but didn't go further. The curfew wasn't over yet, and there was no point lingering. He left and returned to the dormitory, cast Scourgify on himself, crawled into bed, and fell asleep hugging Coalball, who had been waiting for him. He slept hard. Morning came with Harry's voice. "Unbelievable, Dylan. You actually slept in so late today? Were you very tired last night?" Ron stood beside Harry, eyes wide. Dylan rubbed his face. "Yeah, I was a bit tired." How could he not be? He'd been in the Forbidden Forest collecting herbs and dissection material. and after getting back, he'd only slept a little over 2 hours. He'd even had a nightmare, surrounded by acromantulas, forced to fire 100 consecutive Avada Kedavras like chain lightning until every spider was gone. A horrible dream. He got up and started packing. Harry and Ron were already ready. They'd come to wake him when they found him still asleep. "Stay here. I'll be back tonight," Dylan told Coalball, patting its small head. Its lynx-like ears twitched, and it rubbed its fluffy cheek against his palm. "Moo," Dylan smiled, cast a spell to dispel his remaining fatigue, and felt much more alert. He slung on his small backpack and followed Harry and Ron to the Great Hall for breakfast. Chapter 75, Slytherin's Difference. Dylan hadn't gone back into the Forbidden Forest since the last time, at least not until after the Quidditch match. After the all-nighter he'd pulled, he felt his performance in class had suffered. There were spells to chase away fatigue and keep him awake, but they couldn't erase the physical exhaustion underneath. He didn't want exploring the forest to become something that interfered with his studies. He went there to finish refinement tasks and to gather materials so he wouldn't always have to rely on Professor Snape's provision when brewing potions. There were also a few special potions he wanted to brew privately, and the ingredients had to be found by himself. If he wandered into the forest every day just to collect supplies, it would be counterproductive. From now on, he decided, only weekends. That way, even with extra lessons from other professors, he would have time to rest during the day. Rest first, study better later. On the day of the match, Harry heard a piece of news from Ron that brightened him. Dumbledore would be in attendance. That alone made him reluctant to fake illness and skip the game, despite his worries about Quirrell's interference and Professor Snape officiating. When Harry climbed into the stands, he spotted Dumbledore in the teacher's box and visibly relaxed until he saw Snape walk toward the referee's perch. His spirit sank again. "He'll be looking for reasons to dock us points. He always does," Harry muttered. Dylan watched Harry's expression from the Gryffindor stands and couldn't help smiling. Maybe because Snape was there, Harry played like someone with something to prove. He flew harder and faster than anyone had seen at Hogwarts, setting a new record, 3 minutes and 24 seconds. He caught the golden snitch at the crucial moment, just as Snape tried to interfere. The Gryffindor section erupted. Hermione's face was flushed with excitement. She waved a Gryffindor flag, still, amusingly, Neville's bedsheet, while Ron blew a shrill, triumphant whistle. Even Professor McGonagall had a rare rosy smile, clapping enthusiastically. Dylan felt a surge of excitement himself. He half wanted to cast 100 spectacular spells just to celebrate. Across the pitch, the mood in the Slytherin stands was the opposite. Faces were glum, voices low and resentful. Malfoy, in particular, looked furious, clenching his fists, jaw working so hard it creaked. He could not bear to see Gryffindor bask in the glow of victory, especially those he'd always looked down on, now gloating in his face. Malfoy leaned over and whispered to 2 freshmen beside him. Those 2 then started down the aisle bordering the Gryffindor section, shouting loudly enough for everyone to hear. "What are those idiotic Gryffindors so excited about? They only won by luck," one jeered. "Yeah, if the snitch hadn't practically flown into his hands, they'd never have caught it," the other added. "They don't understand real Quidditch. And luck doesn't stay with fools, especially those with impure blood," a hissing voice sneered. "No noble blood, no real right to celebrate, just muggleborns and the like. Pitiful." Several Gryffindors bristled at the slurs. Some began to rise, moving to confront them. But the Slytherin pair kept pacing along the edge of the stands, deliberately loud, as if hoping for a scene. Then, as fate would have it, one of them slipped. He pitched forward, lost his balance, and tumbled off the stands. The thinner boy reached out, and in trying to catch him, was pulled down too. A collective gasp rose from the crowd. The fall happened on the far side of the stadium. The teacher's box couldn't see it clearly. Dylan reached for his wand with a wry look. He could have simply cast a levitation charm to haul them back up. Instead, he decided they needed a small lesson. "Retardo modus," he murmured, a slowing charm. "Arresto momentum," he added, the cushioning charm. The 2 students' screams cut off abruptly. They landed on the pitch, hardly hurt, but very much aware of sore bottoms and bruised pride. Dylan leaned over the railing and watched them clutch their behinds, faces pinched with pain, but too stunned to shout. Let their posteriors learn humility, he thought, half amused. Professor Snape, officiating the match, had already noticed the commotion. He narrowed his eyes and strode down from the referee's box. When he saw the two figures sprawled on the pitch, his expression darkened. They were his Slytherin students. You two, he began, all sharpness. Before he could continue, Dylan stepped forward, placing himself where he could be seen. Professor, he said crisply, they came over to the Gryffindor side and started insulting us after the match. Before anyone could respond, they both fell. He managed a sympathetic sigh. Luckily, I used a slowing charm and a cushioning charm, so they weren't badly hurt. He made a show of modesty. I don't understand why they'd behave like that, but it seems they've paid the price for their insolence. Snape, in his black robes, stood stiff and unreadable in front of the Gryffindor section. A few students who had been ready to leap up straightened their necks and sat down again, shrinking back on seeing the professor's cold look. Snape's gaze swept across the students with the thinly veiled severity everyone feared. Chapter 76. The colorless Imperious Curse is really convenient. Maybe I could use Ron's scabbers to finish the Imperio training task. Professor, I was sitting right there. I'm certain no one cast a spell on those two. They really just fell on their own. If you don't believe me, I can even let you use priori incantatem to show the last spells my wand cast. Dylan kept his wand in his hand, but had no intention of handing it over. Professor Snape glanced toward Crabbe and the other boy, who had already been taken to the hospital wing, then closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, he only gave Dylan a frown, or perhaps it wasn't aimed just at Dylan. He was about to speak when Dylan hurried on. Professor, one more thing. When Crabbe and the others came over, I saw Malfoy whisper something to them before they walked up. Snape's face grew colder. As a master of legilimency, he could tell immediately that Dylan was telling the truth. He detected no malice or guilt in the Gryffindors in the stands. The disappointment that washed over him was palpable. As both head of Slytherin and, in a private capacity, Draco's godfather, he was nearly faint with frustration at how blatantly stupid Draco had been. Such an obvious provocation, such a thick-headed, childish method. With a tight press of his lips, Snape turned and left. His black robes billowed behind him as he walked away. Dylan watched him go and, with a half-smile, murmured, Maybe I should send Professor Snape a new set of robes. He glanced up at Draco, staring blankly from the Slytherin stands, and shook his head. Dylan found him hard to classify. In the larger plot, Malfoy wasn't purely good or purely evil. He was like twilight that never quite becomes night, or dawn that never fully breaks. Just then, Ron came over. Dylan, why did you use a spell to help those two? Ron asked. Dylan came back to the moment and looked at him coolly. They're classmates. I couldn't just stand by and watch them fall and get badly hurt. Ron snorted. They're just jealous Harry broke the record for catching the golden snitch. But Professor Snape won't think you knocked them down, will he? Hermione asked as she approached. Ron flung his head back. Dylan said he didn't, so he definitely didn't. Neville nodded fiercely. Exactly. Hermione glanced at Dylan out of the corner of her eye. Could he have been the one to make Crabbe and the others fall without a sound? There was only one person who fit that bill. But Dylan had already agreed to let Snape use priori incantatem, so it seemed likely this time it really was just Crabbe and Co.'s bad luck. Never mind them, Ron said excitedly. Harry won the game for Gryffindor. We have to celebrate properly. Dylan smiled. Right. That idiot Malfoy must be furious right now. Ron laughed. Dylan blinked. There was a family connection after all. Sirius was Harry's godfather, and Narcissa was related to Bellatrix, so Draco was a sort of cousin in tangled pure-blood terms. A cousin who liked bullying the younger one and looking down on Harry's friends. Still, even if Draco thought himself superior, Dylan shook off the thought. Since I've found a way to make Imperio colorless, it becomes very sneaky, Dylan thought aloud. Maybe I should take the advanced training quest for Imperio. Walking behind Ron, he kept pondering. Once that quest starts, if it's not too extreme, I could use Ron's rat to complete it. Dylan nodded to himself. And Crucio, just be careful with the dosage. Don't kill anything. Ron's scabbers would be perfect. That way, he wouldn't have to go to the Forbidden Forest every time for advanced training quests. Alternate Imperio and a light Crucio on the rat, and the work would be done. They reached Harry. Ron and a gaggle of Gryffindors rushed over, hugged Harry, and tossed him in the air. Dylan watched the noisy, youthful celebration for a moment and felt faintly detached when someone else's voice spoke in his ear. "Dylan, I'm glad you came to see that exciting match." Startled, he turned and found Albus Dumbledore standing beside him, a full head taller. Dylan's heart tightened, but his face stayed calm. He gave an innocent smile. Yes, Harry was amazing. He worked very hard for this match. Dumbledore smiled back. "Aren't you going to join in?" Dylan shook his head. "I won't go over and cause trouble. What if I can't catch him and Harry falls and breaks his hand like Crabbe and the others? That wouldn't be good." Dumbledore studied him for a moment, then said, "I saw what happened earlier. I'm pleased you offered help even while others were gossiping. For that, 10 points will be taken from Slytherin." Dumbledore's beard twitched as he looked at Dylan with delight. "And 10 points to Gryffindor for your kindness and decisiveness." Dylan smiled a harmless smile. "It's nothing, Professor. Thank you." He almost said, "Old Dumbledore" aloud. Dumbledore laughed softly. "Ho, ho, ho. It's been a long time since anyone called me teacher." "That's very good. You have a kind heart, truly." The headmaster patted Dylan's shoulder and playfully ruffled his hair. "Don't you think you could use a haircut?" Dylan touched his somewhat long hair and nodded. "I'll get it cut at the start of summer." "I thought you wanted to style it like Severus. His hair looks neater lately. Was that the potion you gave him?" Dylan thought, "No, it was only a hair-freshening potion." "Ho, ho, ho! I forgot. You have a talent for potions, too," Dumbledore said. "Are you really not coming with us to guard the Philosopher's Stone?" Dumbledore asked. Because of the match and Harry's record, Wood had been pleased and given Harry a few days off and eased his training, which left Harry free to discuss the stone with Hermione and the others. Dylan shook his head. "No, my study schedule is full. I even have divination with Professor Trelawney today. I'm sorry, I really can't spare the time." He looked at Harry, still breathing the excitement, and added, "Besides, I don't think we need to guard the stone like a Cerberus." "Do we look more threatening than a Cerberus?" Ron grinned. "Quirrell won't give up trying to get the stone. We must be on our guard," Harry insisted. "We're not as powerful as a Cerberus, but it has weaknesses." Ron nodded eagerly. "Like the music box." Hermione sighed. "Who would have thought a music box could take down such a terrifying creature?" Ron leaned forward. "With my singing voice, I could do that. Does that mean I could defeat a Cerberus?" Hermione glanced at him in disgust. "Please, you'd only make it angrier." Ron pouted. Hermione turned to Dylan. "But the end-of-year exams are coming. I need to start revising. Shall we study together?" Dylan's gaze was steady, and he shook his head. "No, thanks. I already have a study plan. If you followed it, you might collapse from exhaustion." He added inwardly that he also had to consult with professors from time to time. Hermione exhaled. "All right." Hogwarts had only a single long summer break and no winter vacation, so there were no midterms, only the end-of-year exams. As the year drew to a close, the pressure of assignments mounted. More work, more variety. Harry and Ron were busy trying to prevent Quirrell from stealing the stone and weren't studying with Hermione, but they couldn't avoid the professor's homework. Assignments had to be turned in. In the library that weekend, Ron sat opposite Dylan with a worried face under the lamp, brows tight and eyes wide. Dylan kept his focus on his book. Hermione sat beside him, glancing at Dylan's work now and then, but when she realized he'd already made much more progress than she had, she went back to writing furiously in her own assignment book. Even Harry was too busy. More than half of his parchment was still blank, and 3 piles of assignments waited beside him. Many of the tasks were due the next day, and more would be assigned tomorrow. Even Wood, busy with training, had to manage homework too. "Hey Dylan, have you finished these assignments?" Harry asked when he looked up and saw Dylan's divination book in hand. Ron craned his neck, suddenly alert. Dylan held the book with one hand and looked at them. "Are you working on the charms and transfiguration assignments?" Ron and Harry nodded like eager puppies. Hermione, on Dylan's behalf, answered, Professor Flitwick and Professor McGonagall have already exempted Dylan from those assignments. Do you expect someone who spends his days in professors' offices to need the textbook work? Dylan received private attention. Hermione only spent her time in the library. Harry and Ron looked at him with envy. "Oh my goodness, why aren't the professors exempting me?" Ron wailed. Hermione rolled her eyes. "Ask yourself about your class performance. There's never a question a professor asks you that you can answer perfectly." Ron turned away, offended. "I didn't expect Professor Snape to be the kindest in the end. At least he doesn't pile on assignments." Harry pursed his lips. "His criticisms in class are enough to take your breath away." Hermione agreed. "And Ron, Professor Snape scolded you so much in potions that you'll be able to brew something properly." Ron protested. "Hey, I have talent, all right?" Hermione lowered her head and went back to her writing. "What can we do? Charms and transfiguration assignments are the worst." Harry scratched his head. Suddenly, Hermione pushed her charms homework across the table. "Look at mine. I told you to do it early." "Next time for sure," Harry said, snatching it up. Dylan thought a moment and then set a stack of other assignments on the table. "These are History of Magic and the rest. Take a look." Ron lunged forward, scooping them up. "I'll take whatever I can get. I haven't written a thing yet." Chapter 77. Dragon Eggs? Can you get me some egg whites so I can make Professor Snape a robe? "There are only 2 months left until the exams," Hermione said to Ron, giving him a withering look. "Are you sure you'll pass if you waste time like this?" "Hey, of course I will. Don't say such inauspicious things." Ron snapped, then bent his head and resumed copying, his pen racing across the parchment. Dylan shook his head, amused, and kept reading the divination book in his hands. "Auspiciousness and good fortune are part of divination too," he murmured. Hermione, having nearly finished her own homework, peered over. "Dylan, do you think divination is real? I mean, prophecies and stuff?" Dylan turned a yellowed page until a soft rustle broke the quiet. He tilted his head, thought a moment, and replied in a low voice, "I do. Its effects aren't as obvious as a spell, but divination holds ancient wisdom. Many seers can perceive hidden things through crystal balls, tarot, even tea leaves." Hermione's eyes followed his hand. The 2-page spread became a star chart, constellations and strange sigils woven together. "It sounds more mysterious than magic. If magic exists, why can't divination?" Dylan said with a faint smile. Hermione blinked. "You sound like there's more to it." He only shrugged. "Maybe just that anything's possible. Professor McGonagall's agreed to go over this with me in our next tutoring session. Magic and the power of the mind." A small green flash of envy crossed Hermione's face. "I wish I could have tutoring every day." Dylan smiled crookedly. "You could, if you can keep up with the pace." She nodded, deciding that, for now, she'd stick to books. Ron, however, was distracted even while he copied. He glanced up and around, and then his eyes snagged on a large figure moving between the stacks. "Hagrid, what are you doing in the library?" Ron blurted, not even slowing his pen. "Did you just do 10 laps in the Forbidden Forest? Why are you all hot and sweaty?" Hagrid's rumbling voice came quiet and strained. "Oh, nothing. Got a bit flushed, that's all. I just wanted to see if you were here." Dylan looked up. Hagrid had his hands behind his back, hiding something, badly. "You lot still looking for Nicholas Flamel?" Hagrid tried to change the subject suddenly. "Are you worried about finding out who he is?" Hermione's smile was cool and precise. "Don't worry, we found out at Christmas. And we're doing homework right now," Ron added, watching Dylan's parchment as he wrote in his own. "You already know?" Hagrid's eyes grew wider than saucers. "And that Cerberus is guarding the philosophers," Ron began, but Hagrid clapped his huge hand over his mouth and hissed, "Shh! Don't say that so loud. You want the whole school hearing it?" Harry leaned forward. "We only want to help protect the stone. If you know more, if there are any other protections or traps, maybe we could do something about them." Hagrid looked taken aback, then glanced at Dylan, who had been reading quietly and said nothing. With a long, reluctant sigh, he lowered his voice. All right. I can't do anything with you lot," he whispered. "After you finish your homework, come by the hut, see Fang, and don't go telling everyone, mind. I didn't promise anything." He straightened and hurried away, hands still clasped in front of him. As he left, Dylan caught a glimpse of a round object wrapped in cloth under Hagrid's arm. Ron, barely able to sit still, leapt up. What was he hiding? It looked like a ball. Hermione frowned. Did it? Hagrid's been reading books about dragons lately. What? Ron's face went pale. He's been reading dragon books? You can't have dragons at Hogwarts. Ministry law forbids raising them privately. My brother Charlie has scars from Romanian dragons. Those things are deadly. Dylan looked up from the star chart. The thing he hid looked round, like an egg. A dragon egg? Ron's voice went higher. Where would Hagrid get a dragon egg? And in his hut, he'd be arrested. Not so loud, Harry warned. Someone might hear. They kept whispering, but the damage was done. If anyone was about, they'd already heard. Curiosity won out. Ron darted back between the stacks, returning with a scatter of books he'd found near Hagrid's favored shelf. He dumped them on the table. Dragon breeding for pleasure and profit. From dragon egg to hell. Dragon species of Britain and Ireland. Effective dragon breeding methods. Hermione stared. Why would Hagrid be reading these? Harry tapped one. When Hagrid first met me, I remember him saying he always wanted to raise a dragon. My word, he can't. He'd be in trouble, Ron muttered. Dylan listened, thinking. If Hagrid had a dragon egg, it would need very strict conditions to hatch. Nutrition and moisture in the egg white were vital. Egg white is important for embryonic development, he said slowly. If you removed it, you could kill the egg. Harry, Ron, and Hermione stared. So Hagrid wouldn't let anyone mess with it. Hermione said, I wasn't planning to take it from him without his consent. Dylan shrugged. But if he couldn't raise the dragon, he might be willing to sell. And I have a potion I could test. If I extracted the egg white, perhaps a potion could replace the nutrients without harming the embryo. He thought of the pet space his system provided and the possibility of raising the creature properly himself. In any case, they needed to see what Hagrid really had. They packed up and hurried across the grounds to Hagrid's hut. The windows were shuttered and the curtains pulled tight. The door was sealed so neatly there wasn't a crack to see in. Harry and Ron exchanged looks and knocked. Hagrid, it's us! Come in! The door swung wide, and a blast of heat rushed out, so intense it hit them like a wall. It's blistering in there, Ron gasped. Dylan raised his wand. Aguamenti, glacies crystallorum. Water shot from Dylan's wand and, under the second charm, condensed into glittering ice crystals that swirled around them. The hot, stuffy air cooled as the crystals spread. Ron whooped and lunged toward the little islands of cold, but Hagrid yanked him inside in a single clumsy sweep. Quick! In! Hagrid pushed them further in, then slammed the door behind them. The warmth inside was overwhelming. Definitely dragon egg territory. Sit down. Want some rock cakes? Hagrid's huge head bobbed anxiously as he peered to make sure no one had followed. No thanks. Dylan was the first to decline, wiping his brow. Hermione refused politely as well. All right, Hagrid said, relieved. Well, what do you want to know then? Ask quick. Harry didn't need prompting. He stared at Hagrid. Hagrid's gaze flicked to where Dylan stood, then away. Well, I might have been having a look at something, he admitted finally. But I'm not saying I promised nothing. Don't want no one telling on me. Dylan looked around Hagrid's small, cluttered hut, the air heavy and humid, the curtains drawn tight to keep heat in, the usual oddities of a gamekeeper's life. The picture matched the book evidence and that glimpse of wrapped cloth. Hagrid had a dragon egg. He grinned a little to himself. If there was dragon egg white to be had, it might save him a lot of trouble down the line. If I could get some dragon egg white, he thought, I could finish a potion I've been working on, so Professor Snape's robes become smoother. He'd glide more easily when he walks. Chapter 78, Soul-Stealing Dragon Egg. Heh, stop struggling. Hagrid, besides the Cerberus Fluffy, what other obstacles are guarding the Philosopher's Stone? As Harry asked, he unconsciously edged closer to Dylan. It was so hot in here, he felt like he was melting. Sorry, I can't tell you that. I don't know, Hagrid said, shaking his head. Even if I did, I wouldn't say. He looked at Harry with a frown. Why do you lot want to know so much? Honestly, you already know enough. We want to protect the stone, Harry protested. Shush. The stone will be protected by the school. You won't be needed. Hagrid made a shushing gesture. Have you forgotten? They even tried to break into Gringotts. Hermione blinked. Hagrid really did seem to not know what lay beyond Fluffy. After a moment, she tried a different tack. Hagrid, I think you're the teacher Dumbledore trusts most at this school. Otherwise, he wouldn't have lent you Fluffy as the first line of defense." Hagrid's face was still, but his beard trembled, and he gave a pleased grin. Hermione's flattery had hit the right spot. "You don't have to tell us what comes after Fluffy, but can you tell us which professors know about the stone?" "There are quite a few." Hagrid's hand flew to his mouth, but then he seemed to decide there was no harm in answering. "As far as I know, several teachers were asked by the headmaster to set up charms." "For example," Harry pressed. "For example, Professor Sprout, Professor Snape, Professor McGonagall, Professor Flitwick, and Professor Quirrell." Hagrid counted them off on his fingers. "And of course the headmaster himself." Harry and Hermione exchanged frowns. With so many professors involved, it seemed unlikely anyone could succeed. Dylan, who hadn't been that worried about the stone, had been watching the fire and noticed it was responsible for most of the heat in the hut. He also thought he saw something black in the flames. Interested, he moved closer. "That looks like a dragon egg." "What kind of dragon?" Hagrid froze. He had piled a lot of wood over the egg. How had Dylan found it? He opened his mouth to deny it, but Harry cut in from the side. "Hagrid, we noticed the books you had out in the library were about raising dragons. Do you actually want to raise one?" All the words stuck in his throat. Hagrid sighed. All right. Yes, it is a dragon egg. It's a Norwegian ridgeback." Norwegian ridgeback. Dylan's mind supplied what the name meant. Because of potions, and Professor Snape's insistence on knowing creature parts useful in potions, he'd read a lot about magical creatures. He could picture the ridgeback, a fierce, carnivorous, four-legged, two-winged dragon with poisonous fangs, similar to a Hungarian horntail but without tail spines, and with a black ridge along its back. Norwegian ridgebacks preferred hunting large mammals and sometimes even aquatic creatures. If he had an adult dragon, Dylan thought, he could extract a little dragon blood now and then, take a tooth or scale, or remove a bit of liver and use magic to regrow it, an endless supply of valuable potion ingredients. As the thought formed, a more dangerous, tantalizing idea popped into his head. What if he used Imperio on the egg? Could he make the hatchling obey him? Could it become a pet? He knew that even the most skilled wizards found it almost impossible to control adult dragons with a spell. Dragons were immensely powerful and had high magical resistance, far beyond a Cerberus. But this egg was still an embryo. Why not try? Dylan had recently changed his wand's appearance effects from pink starlight to a colorless, transparent output, and he'd mastered the Imperio enough to cast without a wand. No one in the hut, especially Hagrid, who wasn't a full wizard, could perform only limited magic and was forbidden from practicing most spells, would notice how he was casting. A dragon egg wouldn't make a sound. He pretended to squat by the hearth, wand still, eyes narrowing as he silently activated the spell. Imperio. The spell slid into the black egg without a visible trace. As it took hold, Dylan felt his consciousness pulled by an invisible thread, forming a strange connection with the soul inside the egg. It wasn't a fully formed soul. It was primitive, unshaped, like a young beast half asleep, no clear thought, only instinct and a yearning for life. Even at that embryonic stage, Dylan felt a wild, innate resistance. The embryo tried to fight his Imperio. Dragons developing magical resistance before hatching. That was impressive, but it only made him more excited. If one Imperio couldn't overcome it, what about 3, 5, or 10? Imperio, tenfold. Dylan pushed more power through. 10 invisible, colorless streams of magic surged into the egg. The little soul inside shuddered and sent out stronger resistance, but it weakened rapidly. Then, slowly, the embryo went still. Dylan felt, almost like being inside the shell, the breath of life beginning to stir. He experienced, at once terrifying and miraculous, the embryonic dragon growing, its first vague awareness forming. He murmured, unable to help it, "It's wonderful." Hagrid had come closer and his eyes shone. He beamed at Dylan as if they were kindred spirits. "Isn't it amazing?" he kept saying. "Just an egg, and yet it sleeps safe in the flames like it's in its own cradle. The miracle of life, born from heat." Hagrid looked at Dylan with obvious approval. Most people would see only a dirty black egg and be disgusted or indifferent. But Dylan had seen the beauty right away. "Seems like you love magical creatures as much as I do." After Dylan moved away, Ron got another blast of warmth and stood up to see the egg for himself. He stepped close to Dylan and felt the faint coolness from the ice crystals that clung to him, shivering pleasantly. Hagrid, where did you get this dragon egg? Hermione peered at the rough, cinder-like shell curled in the flames. If you didn't look closely, you might mistake it for a burnt stone. Ron muttered, Hagrid must have spent a fortune. What, is the Forbidden Forest keeper's wage that high? My wages aren't high at all, Hagrid said, cut off as if remembering. Ron suddenly sat up straighter and squinted at Hagrid. You didn't catch creatures in the forest and sell them to buy this, did you? No, I didn't. Hagrid's eyes widened in outrage. I'm there to look after the forest. How could I ever catch and sell its creatures? Say that again, and I'll get angry. Sorry, Ron mumbled. Hagrid chuckled in his deep voice. I won it at cards in Hogsmeade. Some bloke was desperate to get rid of it, and I was lucky I won a few hands in a row. A stranger? Dylan asked, intrigued. Who plays cards in Hogsmeade with a dragon egg as the stake? If someone wanted to get rid of a dragon egg, they could hand it to a sanctuary or a breeder and get paid. Why would they give it away for a few galleons? Dylan pointed out. You said your wages aren't high, Hagrid grumbled, then sighed. That bloke didn't want it. He just wanted rid of the trouble. Dylan's mind flicked back to Quirrell. Quirrell had seemed to pick up a lot from Hagrid before. Could he be the stranger who'd gambled for the egg? When you were playing cards, did you talk about anything? Hagrid nodded slowly. Of course you chat when you play. He was fond of magical creatures, said things even I didn't know. You didn't tell him about Fluffy, how music puts him to sleep, did you? Dylan asked. Hagrid froze. A tremor ran through him, and he slammed a hand down so hard a chair tipped over with a clatter. Did I blabber to someone trying to get the stone? Was that what he wanted all along? Dylan's face was flat. From where I'm sitting, that seems likely. It's over, Hagrid rocked. I told someone how to get past Fluffy. What have I done? Must have been Quirrell, Ron shouted. Professor Quirrell? You can't just accuse him because of what he did before, Hagrid said blankly. He tried to kill Harry. How could he be all right? Hermione snapped. Dylan held up a hand. Calm down. Fluffy was only the first obstacle. There are safeguards set by several professors after that. And you didn't lose anything. You still got a dragon egg. Hagrid was still pale and shaking. Dylan felt the faint stirring of resistance in the egg again. He crouched down, focused, and pushed his power through once more. Imperio, tenfold. The resisting pulse ebbed. The egg's embryonic soul went quiet, and Dylan's link steadied. He straightened and looked at Hagrid. No matter who wants to steal the stone, Dumbledore will have protections ready. Worrying about it won't help. Instead of fretting about things you can't stop, think what you're going to do with this egg. Dylan's tone was casual, but he meant it. If the egg hatched into something valuable and dangerous, it needed a plan. Hermione nodded. We'll stop Quirrell. But are you really going to hatch and raise this dragon? Hagrid sighed, shoulders heavy. I know what you mean. I know. Chapter 79. Controlling pet abilities? Controlling dragons? Hagrid pursed his lips. His thick beard twitched as he tried to think past the obvious. I've read loads of books in the library about raising dragons, he said, confidence bubbling up. I still reckon I can raise it. Dylan raised an eyebrow. Hagrid clearly had no grasp of what he was suggesting. Are you sure your hut can cope with a fully grown Norwegian ridgeback? They breathe fire, Hagrid. Your house is mostly wood, isn't it? Have you thought about how much food a dragon will need when it grows? If I remember correctly, a ridgeback can double in size within a week of hatching. In half a year, the meat it can eat in a day. Dylan looked him up and down. You'd be about the right size for its dinner. Ron burst out laughing, but it was more nervous than anything. You can't keep a dragon here without everyone finding out. Someone'll see it, and then you'll be arrested, sent to Azkaban for illegally raising a dragon. Hagrid nodded, but he wasn't listening. Hermione smirked and glanced at Dylan. We can't persuade him now, she said. His mind's made up about hatching the egg. Dylan watched the little black egg in the bonfire. He'd been subtly keeping it under his control with Imperio, checking the stranger limits of the spell on a creature about to be born. Casting Imperio repeatedly left him a little drained. After all, magical exertion taxed his mind. He thought, half to himself, about optimizing the spell effects, changing his wand's effect to chain lightning so he could, in theory, chain Avada Kedavra. If the Dark Lord could fire off single killing curses and be answered by a timely Expelliarmus, what would anyone do against a storm of killing curses? He imagined hundreds, then thousands, the spell raining down like dumplings, unstoppable. Huh? Hermione snapped him back from his reverie. What are you thinking about? Just interesting things, Dylan said, and forced a smile. He looked back at Hagrid. If you really want to try hatching it, let you try. It might make up for something you've lost. At worst, if you can't handle it, we can contact Charlie. We know he works with dragons in Romania, right? Hermione considered that and nodded. Right, let Hagrid try, although I doubt he can even hatch that coal-black egg. That's not necessarily true, Dylan thought. He quietly cast Imperio on the Norwegian Ridgeback egg again. The system icon on the edge of his vision, like a small scroll he kept trying not to look at, vibrated. He clicked it, and a new achievement prompt appeared. It hadn't lit up yet. It was still grayed out. Achievement: Dragon Lord, to be lit. Description: become the master of a dragon, not to ride one, but to dominate a dragon's power. Requirement up: use any method to make a dragon loyal to you. Reward: pet slot +1, pet power domination. Dylan's eyes brightened. The system could hint in advance. Using Imperio on the egg had triggered the hint, even if the achievement didn't register yet. Pet slot? Pet power domination? He thought back to Coalball, the little umber shadow he'd drawn on the first day he enrolled. A lynx-like creature that could vanish into darkness and even slip through walls. Coalball's stealth was useful, but it had never led to any pet-related achievements. Now, here was the possibility of actually subduing a dragon and making it his pet, putting a huge fire-breathing creature into a neat pet slot. If he could do that, he wouldn't have to be like Hagrid, risking exposure by trying to keep a dragon in a hut. He could let a newly hatched dragon loose at night in the Forbidden Forest, then collect scales, claws, dragon blood, resources beyond value. Using a dragon's power to dominate the forest creatures would make hunting and gathering materials effortless. It was a treasure trove. And pet power domination, by the sound of it, he could channel a pet's power himself. Imagine having Coalball's shadow ability, slipping through walls at will, no need for an invisibility cloak. Or if he had a dragon's power, could he breathe fire? Could he cast fire magic far beyond his current scope? Would his magic resistance and physical durability surge to draconic levels, maybe even surpassing Cerberus tier defenses? If so, he might stand up to Unforgivable Curses directly. He stared at the black egg silently soaking in the flames, like a creature still in amniotic warmth, and let the possibilities roll through his head. If controlling a dragon opened a questline, what rewards might refining a newly hatched dragon into potions bring? Dragon blood potions could change his animagus form. What if he could become a dragon? A wizard who could turn into a dragon, unstoppable magic, towering resistance, massive health. Avada Kedavra might not be an absolute against such a thing. Dylan laughed softly at the fantasy of casting a Patronus and seeing a dragon tear out of it. He was pulled back to reality by Harry talking quietly to Hagrid about the stone and other concerns. Hagrid had already told them most of what he knew and didn't know. What mattered to him now was the egg. They left Hagrid's hut and returned to their dormitories. It was late. After a little tidying, everyone went to bed. Harry, though, couldn't sleep. What if someone finds out about Hagrid's dragon raising? He fretted. Ron, dragging a blanket over himself, grinned in nervous resignation. What else? He gets caught and sent to Azkaban. Dylan curled up with Coalball. He no longer needed a spell to keep the little pet quiet, and fell asleep in the soft pajamas he'd enchanted from a newly bought robe. Days blurred. Dylan's divination studies deepened. That left less time for nightly foraging in the Forbidden Forest. He was also preparing a birthday present for Professor Snape. January was approaching, and last Christmas's gift hadn't impressed him. This time, he wanted something Snape could be proud to wear. Dylan taught himself enough about clothing design to sketch and plan a robe. More than once, Professor Trelawney peered at his notebook and commented. To his surprise, she had a clear eye for clothes. Divination and costume were more entwined than he expected. Dylan, she'd said once, fingers fluttering, clothing is a subtle reflection of destiny, New clothes, new luck, spring in the soul. Is that true? He'd asked, half mocking. The revelations of the crystal ball, the tarot, all lie within the human heart, she said, narrowing her eyes. If you deeply believe new clothes attract fortune, you'll find that you are favored. If not, they're just coverings. Dylan didn't fully understand, but he liked the ritual. He ordered 44 robes from Madame Malkin's shop. 44 had come up as a lucky number in his divination. He spent nearly 1,000 galleons on custom winter robes. When friends raised an eyebrow, he shrugged. If it helps, it's worth it. His divination progress was uneven. Professor Trelawney told him he hadn't found his path yet and that he'd understand in time. McGonagall had scolded him for neglecting Transfiguration. "How can you think about destiny in Transfiguration class?" she demanded. Snape, too, had a habit of dropping comments when Dylan turned up for weekend potions. "I hear you've been led astray by that eccentric old woman," he said once. "Can crystal balls brew a potion in a cauldron?" He was never subtle, but Dylan had his reasons for exploring divination. One afternoon, as he was eating, Hedwig came in white flapping and landed on the table. A note was tied to her leg. Dylan unfastened it and read a hurried scrawl. "Come quickly." The shell cracked. He recognized the handwriting, Hagrid's, or perhaps Ron's. But he didn't rush out. He sent Hedwig on and finished his meal calmly. His Imperio was still holding the egg. He trusted his control. 2 days passed. Dylan had gone to the library to borrow new divination books when Harry came barreling in, breathless. He looked pale and panicked. "What's wrong?" Dylan asked. "Bad news. Dylan, Malfoy found Norbert." "Norbert? That dragon!" "The one Hagrid hatched." Harry's voice was raw with worry. "Ron says if you're caught privately raising a dragon, you'd be sent to Azkaban. What do we do? Malfoy'll report it to Dumbledore." Dylan didn't share Harry's alarm. He watched Harry's anxious face, then let a small, confident smirk spread over his features. "Don't panic yet, but Hagrid must be keeping that dragon in his hut. So how did Malfoy know? He doesn't usually go to Hagrid's." Harry scratched his head. How was he supposed to explain that? That he and Ron had been talking about Norbert a little too loudly and Malfoy, passing by, had overheard. He felt tongue-tied and anxious, then looked at Dylan, who was oddly calm. "Aren't you panicking?" Dylan blinked. "What's there to panic about?" Harry's eyes widened. "Malfoy saw Hagrid feeding a dragon." Dylan nodded. "I know." Harry went quiet for a beat, then said, "Dylan, you've studied spells in depth. Do you know the Obliviate charm?" "Memory charm? I've done some research," Dylan answered. Excited, Harry leapt to his feet. "Then go find Malfoy and obliviate him. The Ministry uses that on Muggles all the time, so they forget. If Malfoy sees a dragon, we can make him forget." Dylan shook his head immediately. "I can't do that. If I cast Obliviate on Malfoy, the professors are likely to notice. I could be expelled for tampering with a fellow student. The Malfoys could even try to get me sent to Azkaban." Harry stared. "Is it that serious?" "Obliviate has consequences," Dylan said. "Do you think the professors wouldn't look into it?" "What are we going to do then?" Harry slumped. "If we don't help Hagrid, he'll be in real trouble." Dylan closed the book he'd been reading. "Like I said, don't panic. There are solutions." "What?" Harry looked up, surprised. "What solution?" Dylan lowered his voice. "Not here. Come with me." He straightened the books and led Harry toward Hagrid's hut. Harry followed, curious but holding back questions until they reached the door. Dylan knocked. Hagrid answered, and inside Ron and Hermione were already there. Hagrid cradled the small black dragon. When it saw Dylan, it made a happy clicking sound, twisting its head and flapping tiny forelegs. "It seems to like you," Hagrid said. "Never seen it so excited." "Maybe I just attract magical creatures," Dylan said with the faintest smile. He considered them all for a moment. He had 2 ways to help Hagrid. One was to write to Charlie Weasley and have him come take the Norwegian Ridgeback to the Romanian Dragon Sanctuary. During the handover, he could use Imperio to make them believe the dragon had already been removed, and then keep the dragon himself. The other was to tell Hagrid he could hide Norbert in a strange private space, a pet space, so no one at Hogwarts could find it. That way, Hagrid and Dylan would both know Hagrid could help feed the dragon, and Dylan could legitimately bring Norbert out into the Forbidden Forest for Hagrid to see. Each option had pros and cons. The first kept only Dylan knowing, but put all the risk on him and required using Imperio on people, morally and legally dangerous, and risked major backlash if discovered. The second shared the risk with Hagrid, gave Dylan convenience and help, but added another person who might blab. Hagrid, however, was not naturally discreet. Dylan looked at Hagrid's bright, pleading eyes and chose the safer personal route. Share the secret and trust Hagrid. Let Hagrid know, he thought. If something goes wrong, at least he'll be with us. It's Malfoy's fault that we've had to wait so long. It's why Hagrid's been forced to take the dragon in, Dylan said, looking at Hagrid. I read about a spell in an old magic book. A spell? Hagrid set Norbert more carefully on his lap and leaned forward. What sort? It lets me form a contract with Norbert, and once the contract's made, I can put him into a peculiar private space I call a pet space. You won't need a dragon-safe chest. Those things are expensive, and as long as Norbert's in my pet space, no one can get him. If any professor tries to check, they won't find him because he'll be in my space. Ron's eyes widened. There's a spell like that? Harry looked surprised too. Hermione frowned. Where did you see this? What's it called? Is it ancient magic? Dylan hesitated for a second, then smiled faintly. Sorry, I can't remember. Hermione's suspicion flared. The omission was clumsy. Dylan didn't push. He hadn't brought the matter to Hagrid privately because this plan required Hagrid to deny there had ever been a dragon in the first place, even to his friends, saying it had already been taken away by Charlie. Better to tell everyone up front than let Hagrid blurt it out later. Hagrid stared at Norbert, stunned. You really can do that? Could I learn it? Dylan forced a smile and suppressed an eye roll. No, it's a complicated spell I researched. Only I can master it. Seeing Hagrid's crestfallen look, Dylan added, It's actually tied up with divination. I came across it while researching transfiguration, summoning, and a bit of divination, so I can't teach it to you. Hermione still looked doubtful, but Dylan didn't much care. He trusted Harry and the others not to betray Hagrid, not just because of their characters, but because Gryffindors don't turn on friends. By the time they might realize he'd been less than honest about how he'd found the spell, he planned on being indispensable in the magical community anyway. Besides, with his mastery of high-level curses and spell combinations, he didn't fear being challenged. If we don't do this, he said bluntly, the other option is to write to Charlie to take the dragon away. He'd get shipped off to Romania and likely be picked on by wild dragons. He probably wouldn't survive. Or worse, I'd have to use Imperio on Charlie and his crew to make them believe the dragon had already gone. If I ever got caught raising a dragon after that, I'd be finished. I'd rather take my chances with Hagrid. Oh, Merlin, Hagrid said, making a distressed face. I couldn't stand the thought of Norbert being bullied. Dylan asked casually, Is the eggshell still there? Hagrid blinked, distracted by the worst-case scenario Dylan had painted, and then shook his head. No, Norbert chewed it clean off as soon as he hatched. That's a shame, Dylan said, then pressed his point. So what do you reckon? Want Ron to write to Charlie? Hagrid shook his head so hard his hair bobbed. No, I don't want him to go. Good, Dylan said. Think about it. You hatched him yourself. You care about him. If I put him in a pet space, he'll be safe and can grow strong. If you want to see him, I'll bring him out into the Forbidden Forest so you can feed him yourself. You'll prepare all his food. It'll be just like you raising him. Hagrid's eyes shone. I do want that. I want to feed him. I can try the spell, Dylan said, sounding selfless. If it doesn't work, there's a fallback, and I won't be harmed. If anything goes wrong, I'll take responsibility. Anything to let you raise a dragon. Hagrid looked like he might cry. Dylan, he choked. Hermione and Harry exchanged wary looks. Hermione leaned toward Harry and signaled with her eyes that Dylan sounded more like he wanted to keep the dragon for himself. I feel the same, Harry mouthed. Ron, red-faced with excitement, grinned. Merlin's beard. Dylan, you're far too loyal. I declare you a Gryffindor. Dylan ignored the flattery and looked back to Hagrid. So, do you trust me? I do, Dylan. I believe you can cast it. The professors will praise you. Except perhaps Professor Binns. He doesn't usually talk much, but he'd probably call you an excellent student too, Hagrid added, proud and hopeful. Hermione's frown deepened. Are you sure it's safe? Can you really guarantee that the space won't cause problems? She really wanted to ask if the spell even existed, but if Dylan refused to say more, she couldn't force it. Hagrid, desperate, put a hand on his heart. Don't worry, I'll vouch for him. If there's a problem, let people say I was dabbling in dark arts. Don't say that, Hagrid, Hermione admonished at once. Ron piped up, practical as ever. But Dylan, didn't you say Hagrid's wages won't cover feeding a full-grown dragon? As Norbert grows, how'll you get enough food? Dylan glanced at Ron. Don't worry, it's just food. If Hagrid can't afford it, I'll pay. Harry added immediately, my parents left me some money. If you need it, I can buy food for Norbert. Thanks, Dylan said, and Harry blinked at the unexpected gratitude. Hermione pursed her lips. So what kind of spell is it, Dylan? Are you going to cast it now? Dylan moved in front of Hagrid. The little dragon, sensing him, strained hard to get free, leaning forward so all 4 feet reached for Dylan. Its neck spines trembled. For a moment, a flicker of almost feverish eagerness passed through Dylan's eyes. All right, he said. I'll try it. It might not work, but we have a fallback, and if it fails, I'll be fine.